It's officially the offseason, so it's time to start looking at free agent targets for the Royals in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Well, tonight is going to be the first of many over the next 2 weeks of episodes breaking down free agent targets. Just because the first guy I have is the first one going doesn't mean necessarily he would be the number one option or the perfect option. I'm just going over a bunch of targets that I think the Royals will at least give a call to in the offseason. And the Royals had their end of the season presser today. We'll have more of a reaction to that in the second part of today's episode, and also a little bit later on throughout the week. So we'll have plenty of thoughts on what JJ Picollo said and what Matt Quatraro said about their season in review final presser of the year. But I've been getting a lot of questions about what the Royals should go after, who they should go after, and maybe who's the most affordable. And, today what I thought was so interesting was that when asked about the shopping list, what does J.J. Picollo want to go out there and get? He mentioned a leadoff hitter that can get on base and a middle of the order bat. Now, the first guy I've got here as a free agent target, we might get up to 15 or 20 by December, probably a lot more than that now that I think about it, for guys the Royals can take a look at and why it makes sense. The first guy I have on my list, and I've already put it out there on Twitter. Again, follow me at JohnnyJ_15. First guy on my list is Tyler O'Neill. And I think there's a couple reasons as to why Tyler O'Neill makes sense for the Royals. You go back to last offseason, and it's not just because the Royals were interested in him at one point in time, but I think that the Royals were going through a couple of options for corner outfielders that were coming off either an injury-ridden season or a down year. They looked at the prices of those guys. They looked at who would be maybe an upgrade defensively. And in the end, Tyler O'Neill picked Boston, and the Royals went with Hunter Renfroe. I believe Hunter Renfroe is going to pick up his player option, so he's going to be back in Kansas City either as a starter or a platoon bat. Who really knows? But I do imagine that Hunter Renfroe is going to pick up his player option just because he wasn't really healthy this year, and I'm not sure he's going to get more than what that player option would be giving him, which I think is around $7-ish million. I would need to go double check on that. But Tyler O'Neill goes to Boston and really showcases power in the way that he hadn't really showcased it before. And he is a right-handed bat. He's built like a brick house, basically. I know he's only 5'11", but I just urge you to go look up pictures of Tyler O'Neill, and he looks like a 30 home run guy. It looks like last year was not really a fluke. And when I mean last year, I mean, one that's still going on. The 2024 season, I should say. But he crushed 31 home runs for Boston this year, and in only 113 games. There are flaws to his game, but as I said, what makes sense is the Royals tried to kick the tires on Tyler O'Neill last offseason. Didn't happen. I imagine in the same way they did it with Seth Lugo, they're going to go revisit that and just see what the price is. It doesn't mean they're going to pull the trigger, but I think see what the price is. And we now know that price is going to be significantly more than what he made this past year, which was not a lot. It was a very affordable, cheap one-year deal. Now, after coming off a 113-game season, still not an entire year, but 31 home runs and 113 games, is eye-opening to say the least. Now, as I said, there are flaws to his game. He swings and misses a lot. He is a big strikeout candidate. He is somebody that is basically a home run, strikeout, walk guy. Now, I think that would be the best way to categorize it for Tyler O'Neill. Not Adam Dunn-esque, right? When you remember watching Adam Dunn play, he was the definition of a home run, walk, or strikeout. Tyler O'Neill does have some defensive abilities. He's got some speed, not so much showcase last year in Boston, but 31 home runs is going to be 31 home runs. 27 of those 31s would have been home runs at Kauffman Stadium. So it's not like he benefited from a small ballpark. It's not like he was playing, for Houston where they've got the Crawford boxes in left field and he had a couple of pop-ups or line drives that found their way into the seats. No, I understand he deals with Fenway Park and that's a shorter left field, but 27 of those 31 would have left the yard at Kauffman Stadium too. So he's got legitimate power. You've got that tie from last year that mixes in really well. And one thing that JJ Picollo mentioned about, his I guess, pursuit of these guys in the offseason and through free agency was that they need to be guys that can, work the count a little bit, that can get on base at a high clip. And, you can't always teach that to a young hitter. Either they've got that ability or they don't. If they're an aggressive hitter, you might be taking the bat out of their hands. If they're going to be, a little bit more passive, you would like them to be more selective. But I just don't see a situation in which Michael Massey, Kyle Isbell, Salvador Perez, for one, though he's not a young hitter, but, Michael Garcia, those are not going to be guys that just in 1 year's time, all of a sudden start, posting a 10 to 12% walk rate. That just doesn't feel likely to me. If anything, they might increase it by a few ticks here and there. But Tyler O'Neill is one of those guys that walked at an 11% rate this year. He struck out 33% of the time, but you have the 31 home runs, you have the 11% walk rate, and a 33% K rate. To me, that screams middle of the order bat. And I do think that he would be somewhat in the price range of what Kansas City would be looking for. He's not the only option. He's not the perfect option. Let me be clear about that. I mean, you could absolutely make a case for, last year for Boston. Yes, he had 31 home runs. He did strike out a lot. He walked a lot, but it still was 113 games. You need somebody who's durable out there for 162 games. You don't want to see 113 games. You want to see 140 from a middle of the order bat. And that's something that Tyler O'Neill has done once in his career. And it was a ridiculous year that he had back in 2021, I believe it is, when he posted over a 5-WAR season for the Cardinals. Since then, not that great of success, but I do look at the walk rate. He's had 3 straight years now where it's basically around 10%, 9.9 in 2022, 10.5 in 2023. And then, of course, he had a career high 11.5% walk rate for Boston this past year. But I look at the power numbers, and then I also ask the question, is that an upgrade over what the Royals have? And I believe he does. I believe he provides that upgrade, that value for the Royals in left field where, they were and still are high on MJ Melendez. They believe in the potential, but now the Royals aren't losing 100-plus games where you can bank on potential. You can wait it out for a guy. I think the Royals need to go get some serious pop in the lineup. And when I look at what they did with Hunter Renfroe last year, yes, very cheap. That was a guy that wasn't coming off a great year. They were hoping for a bounce back. You would be striking when Tyler O'Neill just put in basically the second best season of his career, right? The only other time, as I said, he had showcased 30-plus home run power was that incredible 5-plus WAR season in 2021 with the Cardinals. So you might think that is maybe still in there, and Boston believed there was something there, and he did show that maybe something was tapped into or rediscovered for Tyler O'Neill. And for left field, for a corner outfield bat, the market's not giant, really. There's only 5 or 6 guys, as we talked about on Mailbag Friday, that makes sense for the Royals, that would be in the price range. And from what JJ Picollo said today is he'll sit down with John Sherman in the coming weeks here and get an estimate of what the payroll will be. And he said, I expect it to be similar to last year, that John Sherman's going to be flexible. If we want a guy, he's going to give us the money to go out there and spend. So is that Tyler O'Neill? Is that Michael Conforto? Is that Jurickson Profar? Is that Anthony Santander? There's options out there, but it's not a vast group here. It's not 20 outfielders you can pick from. It's a small minority. And Tyler O'Neill is one of those guys that I don't think, because he's going to be 30, you're having to give a 4 or 5 year deal to. I don't think he's going to be a guy that garners anywhere from 18 to 20 million. He might get to 18, but that would be a very healthy market for him. That would probably be dependent on what these other guys are going to be going for. But you have that tie to last year. You've got a need for a middle of the order bat. You look at positions that are available for the Royals. Corner outfield is one of them. And if I break it down with, Tyler O'Neill and Anthony Santander, Santander is a net negative basically in the field. He's a DH. He's a DH only. And the Royals may look at that and say, hey, we're fine with that. Anthony Santander is a DH, and we love the 44 home run season. But if you want a guy who can play the field and who would be an upgrade over MJ Melendez, it would be Tyler O'Neill. Like I said, though, just because he's the first guy we're doing an episode on doesn't make him the absolute number one by far and away priority. He's just a target I imagine they're going to have. But you look at some of these numbers that he was able to get over the last, 4 years. I know that you could look at that Boston year as being the outlier after 2021, but some of these numbers are upgrades over MJ Melendez. You look at WRC plus after that 2021 season, the 5+ WAR season, where he had 143 in that department for the WRC plus runs created, I should say, instead of just saying the stat. Then he had 99, one tick below the league average, which is 100. And then in 2023, he had 97 last year for Boston, or this past season for Boston, 131. So that's 31 points above the league average. He is going to be a little bit expensive. I don't know how many years he'd be looking for, but he'll be a hell of a lot more expensive than what we saw in the offseason of 2023, because now he's got that 31 home run season under his belt, and that's also 31 home runs in 113 games. He had the 34 home run season and 138. So you had, 25 more games, and all he would have needed was 3 more home runs to tie that total. So maybe Tyler O'Neill can build off this, and the Royals could be a team that strike with that. But I like some of the ties that the Royals already have and the need for a middle-of-the-order bat, and I believe Tyler O'Neill could be one of those fits for the middle of the order. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's discuss the difficulty of building on a season like this, why it doesn't always work out, but why the Royals are going to ensure they are one of those teams that builds on good seasons. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today in Ibotta. Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year, and that could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is yours. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta by using code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or the App Store and use code LOCKEDONMLB. I believe that the common feel around a bad baseball team when they lose 100+ games is, well, there's only one way to go, and that's up. And I think that's where a lot of Royals fans were after the 106-loss season. Maybe you were over-pessimistic or overly pessimistic, and you thought that this team was going to get worse because there wasn't really anything coming up from the farm system. Maybe you didn't have the belief that ownership and J.J. Picollo were going to make moves to make the team better. But I think when you just play the odds, you lose that many games, even if you improve by 5 or 6 games, it should be easy to do. To go from 56 and 106 to 62 and 100 should be doable, because it's still really hard to lose 100 games, right? That's just baseball 101, it feels like. Like the teams that lose 100+ games, that's sole blame going to ownership and the front office, because you can assemble a team, you can sign guys to make that team a 90-loss team. The Chicago White Sox losing 120 plus games, that's just inexcusable from ownership and from a front office, more so from ownership. When you lose that many games, you're trying to lose that many games. And for the Royals, I don't think they envisioned being that bad. They knew they weren't going to be that good. But when they make all these moves, it was easy to notice that they're going to improve a lot from 56 and 106. 30 wins is a lot to improve. And I think the Royals would even tell themselves, honestly, we surprised ourselves a little bit to go from a 106 loss season, make it to the postseason, finish second in the AL Central, a division that sent three teams, right? Yeah, three teams in the postseason. And they win a playoff series and win one game in the ALDS. I think they surprised themselves a little bit. Not to say they were a complete overachieving team. They're a talented team, and I expect them to be good next year. But now that focus shifts, and JJ Picollo did touch on this in the presser today about the end of the season, that now that focus shifts from we need to improve and we're hopeful to get to the postseason to we expect to be good and we have to ensure that October is a thing, that you go into the year thinking, all right, how do we get that first round bye? How do we win this division? How do we put ourselves in a really good spot come October? That's the difficulty of building on a season like this now, because fans have the expectation. The league has the expectation. You're not going to sneak up on anybody. If the Royals win 90 games next year, I think a lot of people will say, wow, that's an impressive year. Anytime you win 90 plus games, which the Royals have not done a lot of in their franchise existence, people notice it. But it's a different, I guess, a different vibe, a different feel around a team when you go from 86 and 76 to 90 and 72, then 56 and 106 to 86 and 76. Every time the Royals did something well, every time the Royals went on a streak, and MLB Network talked about him, or Fox talked about him, or some of the MLB accounts on social media talked about him, it was this, wow, what an incredible turnaround. This team is defying all odds, and you tip your cap to what they did. It was awesome to see a small market team spend the money and it pay off. Now, if the Royals play well next year, it's kind of what you expect from a team that won 86 games. Maybe some people think there's going to be regression, and it's possible. That's why I'm saying it's incredibly difficult to build on a successful season like this. For Baltimore in 2023, winning 100 games, I think it's really hard to improve on 100 games, which is why they only won 90-plus games and fell a few games short of 100. But still, it's a great season. Nobody really talked about how great Baltimore was. So now you kind of step out of that America's darling limelight of coming from the ashes and 106 losses to playoff baseball. Everybody's rooting for you. You are the underdog. To if the Royals make moves in the offseason, they're going to be talked about in spring training in February as a team you have to look out for in the American League. And now it's a matter of how do you handle that pressure? Nobody on this Royals team that grew up in the Royals organization, other than Salvi, let's give credit to Salvi there, has dealt with that type of expectation of you're supposed to win. You can't fall into a 15 and 25 hole early on in the season in the first 40 games. The Royals had to start hot again. The Royals have to sustain it. The Royals have to be buyers at the deadline. Now it's not a wish. Now it's not a hope. The goal should be to expect that, and that you give the fans another year of winning baseball, and hopefully one that goes further than the ALDS. Because we had so many conversations on this podcast after the Royals beat Baltimore of everything else is gravy. It's all house money from here on out. The Royals could get swept by the Yankees and it wouldn't matter. It's still a monstrous success of a season. There is no way to deny that. You could not sit here on Friday and go, well, the Royals didn't achieve all that we thought they could. No, making the postseason, maybe even having a winning record, would have been just counted as a massive success for this team. Now, as tough as it is to believe, there is that feeling of if you fall short, of the ALDS next year, it's considered an underwhelming season. Maybe not to everybody. I can understand that. But to me, when you're trying to build a winning culture and every single year you are supposed to be a feared team or a team you have to take seriously, that is important. That, I think, if the Royals had a winning record for the next decade, but it didn't result in the World Series, I think you would still feel this sense of pride of every single year we have a chance, rather than you have this miraculous season and then you're kind of back down to the gutters and the dweller. So, or the bottom feeders, the bottom dwellers, whatever you want to call them. That would be what we went through in 2016, 17, 18, and 19. After 2017, the Royals weren't taken seriously anymore. So now that you have been taken seriously once again and you backed up all the offseason hype, now you got to do it again, but take it another step. Now you have to be that team that can put some pressure on the top teams in the American League. Look, the American League Central is going to be wide open come spring training. Now, it does matter what Detroit does and what Minnesota does and what Cleveland does. White Sox are not going to be put in that conversation, but 4 teams in this division who all had, a chance at the postseason until the final weekend of the year, it's going to be wide open. What can you do to give yourself the best chance and a realistic chance of winning this division? The Royals were picked by some people out there to win the AL Central this year, but a lot of people said, really, because they signed Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha and Will Smith and Chris Stratton, like, now they've got a season to back that up. They can back up this type of noise by going out there and spending and having people buy into them again, because that's what's fascinating and exciting about this offseason. You're building on a team that did a lot. You're not building on a team that won 75 games or that won 80 and fell short or that just missed the postseason. You are building on a team that won a playoff series, that gave the Yankees a lot to handle in the ALDS. Not a game 5, but all those games were close. You're building on that. It's hard to top that type of season. It's the way things go in sport. If you have a 12-win season in the NFL, it's hard to surpass that the next year. In baseball, if you win 95 games, it's really hard to top that the next year. For the Royals, the goal needs to be, how do we get to 90? How do we get to 90 wins and win this division and get a first-round bye in the postseason? That I'm very intrigued by and excited to see how the Royals try to build on that and reach that goal in 2025. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, gotten a lot of questions about Jack Caglione. Can we expect him in 2025? I'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned in to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor in FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. And right now, as I'm doing this podcast, the Mets and Dodgers have already wrapped up. The Yankees lead the Guardians at this point in time. So I'll look ahead into the next couple of days and the games that'll be happening. The Guardians and the Yankees will be playing tomorrow at 6:38. Garrett Cole's on the bump against Tanner Bybee. I am going to take the over on innings pitched for Garrett Cole. He was dominant against the Royals in Game 4. I expect him to be dominant again against the Cleveland Guardians. Maybe not against Josh Naylor, though, because Naylor does have a lot of success against him. But I'll roll with Garrett Cole there, and I'll do so over at FanDuel. We all know Jack Caglione is the most exciting prospect in the Royals system. Maybe if you're a diehard prospect fan like my buddy Preston Fares, Royals Miners, of course, does fantastic work. He's got the rundown on all the prospects out there. So maybe Jack Caglione's not his favorite prospect, but for a lot of Royals fans, Jack Caglione is the favorite prospect because he was the first-round pick this year. He had really shined at Florida in a way that not many guys had shined before. He's the two-way player. He's got the looks. He's got the makeup. He's got the pedigree, all that type of stuff. He is a prospect that oozes a lot of tools. There is some swing and miss to his game. He didn't go into the Royals minor league system and completely tear it up. There was some struggles early on, as I kind of expected there to be, just because when you're that young and you're coming from college and there's a lot of expectation put on you, you're not always going to go hit 450 off guys that have been pitching in low A or high A for the entire year. And that was something that Jack Caglione had to deal with. And for the Royals' sake, they're in a very good spot with the state of their organization and where Jack Caglione is. If the Royals had followed up a 106 loss season with a 100 loss season, and this farm system really hadn't made tremendous strides, I think you would be put in a very tough spot because fans would have been fed up about the state of the major league team. And there would have been this added pressure of, well, just bring up Jack Caglione, because baseball has kind of shifted from the traditional part of what it is to be a prospect and how you're brought up through a system. I mean, going back to even the days with Eric Hosmer and Mike Moustakas and you know Alcides Escobar and Lorenzo Cain once they came over, Johnny Giavotella, you know, even guys like Will Myers and Jake Odorizzi and Mike Montgomery, Salvador Perez. I mean, the list goes on and on of that late 2000s, early 2010s. I mean, those guys were slowly brought along. They were not rushed to the big league level because really back then, nobody, unless you were a megastar, got rushed, that you went from low A to the big leagues in a span of a year. Then some guys started to change that narrative, that a prospect had to go through low A to high A to double A to triple A. Juan Soto went from high A to the big leagues in Washington and was a star by 19 years old. And that kind of set this trend, in my opinion, of teams just not feeling like young hitters needed to go through every single level. That maybe once they crushed it in high A, it didn't do them any good to go to triple A and face guys that were either burnouts at that point from the big league level, or they were guys just struggling to keep their footing in the minor leagues. They just felt like, hey, this guy's got the it factor. Let's test him at the big league level. It doesn't always work out well. Look at what happened in Baltimore with Jackson Holliday this year. Jackson Holliday, in my opinion, was rushed by Mike Elias in that group to get up to the big league level, and he struggled a lot. He's younger than pretty much everybody out there at the big league level. But then you have guys like Jackson Chourio in Milwaukee at 20 years old that's having big opposite field home runs in playoff games. Like, there are just guys that can buck that trend, that can change the narrative. And can Jack Caglione be that guy? I mean, you look even last year to Texas with Evan Carter and Wyatt Langford being a very notable one. That Texas just said, hey, he's good, and we feel like he can help us at the big league level. Let's see if it can happen. We've seen it with pitchers before. Pitchers feel like they can, do it every other year. With the Royals, it was Brandon Finnegan. Remember with the Rays, it was David Price. I remember in the COVID year with the White Sox, Garrett Crochet. You just had that quick, jump to the big league level. Now with pitchers, they can do it. If they've got the stuff, they can be thrown in the bullpen for a playoff push. And sometimes it works out well. But for hitters, it can be different. And I think with Jack Caglione, back to the point of the Royals' state of the organization and where they're at with Jack, they do not need to rush him. And I think the best part about this is Vinny Pasquantino's at first base. It is not that Vinny is the answer 5 years down the road. But while Jack Caglione is getting his footing at the minor league level, the Royals have an everyday first baseman that can drive in over 100 and be one of the top hitters in that lineup. If Jack Caglione was a left fielder and the Royals needed to fill that hole, you might be in a different spot if he was a corner outfielder. And there could be a conversation of, does he move to the outfield when he gets up to the big league level because Vinny's still on this roster? In my opinion, I think it just moves Vinny to DH and Jack Caglione's the everyday first baseman, because I think profile-wise, ceiling-wise, he can be a better first baseman than Vinny Pasquantino by a wide margin, in my opinion. But you don't need to rush him because the Royals have a guy that can handle first base. Now, here's the fun part about it. If the Royals are competing next year, which we expect them to, and they get to the second half of the season, and Jack Caglione's hitting 385 in Double-A, there's a world in which you just say, hey, he can help us at the big league level now. And we got a spot in this lineup for Jack Caglione. And he can be a serious threat, and he can be a guy that hits right behind Salvador Perez or Vinny or Renfroe and he's a huge upgrade. There's a world that can happen. And as I've stated before, maybe it was just on Twitter, but I think the earliest arrival would be the second half of this coming year. I think the second half of 2025 would be the best possible scenario for Jack Caglione. If I was to be more realistic, because I do think there's going to be some struggle from time to time, and you don't just bring him up because the slash line looks good or the home run total looks good. You got to make sure that swing doesn't have any more holes in it for the minor league level. There's going to be some growing pains at the big league level, but if you bring him up with a hole in his swing and a high strikeout rate in Double-A, despite hitting 340, he's going to be exposed to the big league level. He's going to have guys that can put him away on 3 or 4 pitches because they know how to throw to him at the big league level. But if there's a world in which that walk rate goes up, that K rate goes way down, he's hitting for power, he's hitting for average, he's handling first base, there's a world in which the Royals in the second half say he's ready for the big league level because college hitters can make that transition a little bit easier. But the Royals also need to make sure, in my opinion, that they don't miss on Jack Caglione. They develop him properly. They take their time with him. And if he forces their hand, he forces their hand. But this is a guy that I just don't think you want to risk rushing him or putting him in a spot that's not as favorable. You want to take your time with Jack Caglione because you need him to be a boom prospect. You need to be that guy that can hit third in the lineup right behind Bobby Witt Jr. You need the 1-2 punch because right now the 1-2 punch is Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez. And Salvador Perez isn't going to play forever. He's on the last leg of his career, and you need another thunderous bat in that lineup. Jack Caglione can be that, but you got to make sure you develop him properly, and that's something the Royals haven't always done the best with their hitting prospects. Pitching prospects, they've done better of late, but hitting prospects, a lot of guys have fallen short, and a lot of guys got rushed when they didn't need to. If Jack Caglione forces their hand, I would say second half of next year. If there's not a scenario where he's tearing up every level in the minor leagues, then I would say wait till 2026 and then go from there. But to me, there is a scenario in which he's there in 2025, but it's going to take him absolutely shredding minor league pitching for the first half of the year. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every aspect of the playoff picture. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to give another free agent target for the Royals and give more thoughts on what that end of the season presser indicates for the Royals going into the offseason. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.